I'm going to put them in a slide view because I'm going to be jumping back and forth between slides and the Supabase admin and kind of half-baked application that I built as an example. But to give you an introduction on my, I'm an engineer at Paramount, like Paramount Plus Paramount. But I don't work on the Paramount that you watch it at home, applied machine learning group, which the work we do influences the recommended content and carousels on Paramount Plus. Happy to go into more detail on that in at pizza time. But other than that, I'm a freelancer. Before that, I was a senior developer at Few, which was a very cool web design and development agency. Learned a ton there, got to work on a bunch of interesting projects, including a interactive display built in Next.js for a museum in Northwest Arkansas. And then before that, my first job was at a company called Aptogee. It's a big startup in the only startup in Arkansas now. Huge K-12 education startup in Arkansas is kind of where I cut my teeth on front-end development. But enough about me. So to give an introduction to Supabase, you might be thinking, what is Supabase? Why Supabase? So Supabase is, if you're familiar with Firebase, it's like Firebase, but it's completely open source and it's built on Postgres instead of a NoSQL database like Firebase is. It's actually built on an open source tool called Postgres, which turns it kind of builds an API layer on top, directly on top of your Postgres database. The reason for using it is so you don't have to worry about building, deploying, and maintaining your own backend application infrastructure. It's not a very trivial thing to do, especially as you scale that to tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of users. Like I said, it's scalable. They have a motto, pay as you grow. So kind of like AWS and other cloud providers, they have kind of an auto scaling feature that supports unlimited users as long as you have a check to cut for it. And it has built-in authentication and file storage, which I'll give practical examples of all these in the presentation, and a lot more. If you ever want to check it out, if you have your computer in this presentation, you can go to supabase.com and look at their docs. But to start with, I'll be talking about auth. I think auth is the first thing we think of when we start building a user application or a web application. We want to have users and associate data with those users. And so to give an example, I built this website I call photobomb.fun. And so I'll kind of just go over a little bit of how the auth works within Supabase. So you have an auth, a set of auth tables, and one of those is users. Supabase actually supports all kinds of different authentication methods, email and password, which is I'm using magic links and one-time passwords, and OAuth, so you can do social authentication with Google and Facebook. And I can actually show you the list of providers. It's very long. One thing to keep in mind is that email actually has confirmations built in. So if you're building a login system with Supabase, go into your providers and turn off confirm email if you don't want to work with email confirmations from the start. That threw me for a loop. I had to figure out why I wasn't logging in even though I was signing in. It was because it was waiting on me to confirm that email. And so I can show you a little bit of the code as well. So to log in, it's as simple as calling sign in with password and just passing the email and password that the user gives you. And for joining, it's these real quick. It's just about as simple. You sign up. Here I'm passing additional metadata. In this case, a username. So if you wanted to pass a first name, last name, address, username along with the user when you sign up, this is how you do it. And so when a user signs up or joins, or signs up or logs in, that hits Supabase's servers and generates a JWT. As far as like setting up the framework for logging in, I would really recommend looking at their docs for individual frameworks. So in this case, I'm using Next.js. So if you just do Next.js Supabase auth, there's a really great set of documentation that's kind of specific to each framework. So if you're working with Angular Vue, I'm sure they have an example and a set of a library of helpers to help you with that. But when you join, it creates a record in this users table. And you'll notice here that the username is missing, and that's because it stores the metadata a little bit weird. It stores it as like an optional metadata object, and they recommend actually creating a separate profiles table for additional user information. So I have a separate profiles table where I add the email and username, and they also have a whole tutorial on setting up a trigger for your users table. If you go to database triggers, the trigger is actually straight from the Supabase docs as well. Which I highly recommend going through. In case you think I'm some sort of SQL wizard, I'm not. I just use this, that's to create the table. They give you this trigger down here that you can just put into the SQL editor, which is right here. You can, you know, I actually still have it here. You can put in whatever SQL here and run it. But that trigger actually, it detects when a new user is inserted into your table, and then it takes that metadata that I passed, the username, or in your case, whatever information you want to pass, and it actually inserts another record into the profiles table. So I can get back that username, which is what you see here. So that's a lot of information. As far as like authorization and people's access to certain tables, it's built on top of Postgres's built-in row level security, and that revolves around creating RLS policies. Supabase actually does a really good job at creating, so you can see here on the post tables, I have 2 active RLS policies. It does a really great job at when you create a new policy of actually giving you templates. So you could say get started from a template. You could say, I just want everybody to be able to read these, which is helpful if you go to the homepage. Like I don't want to restrict. If you log out, you can go to the homepage and see all of the images that people have posted. I don't want to restrict that based on who's logged in because I want to get interested in the application maybe. So you can enable read access for everybody. And then you can enable insert and update access only for specific or for people who are actually authenticated into your platform. And so that's kind of the gist of how RLS works. You can do more complicated things. I think this is sufficient for a lot of use cases as far as like CRUD or creating, reading, updating, and deleting goes. So that's auth and a little bit of the SQL editor and data, which I'll talk about next. So as I already showed you, you have the table editor, which you can see, you can view your tables as if it was a Google spreadsheet or an Excel spreadsheet, which is super helpful. You can insert data if you need to create a new table. So let's say we wanted to create a likes table. You would just give it a name. You would definitely want to enable row level security. You can enable real time, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then let's say each like is associated with a post. And so we'd want to create a foreign key and associate that like with a particular post. And to do that, you just click this link. You click the table you want to reference. So I would reference the public post table, and then you can name it. Or actually you name it in this other view. You select the column that you actually want to reference on that post table, which is the ID. And then I can call it post ID here. We also want to associate with a particular user, and this kind of goes back to the user authentication. We don't really want to send, this is something that I ran into while I was building this application. We don't really want to worry about sending the user ID every time we create a new record of any sort, a new post, a new photobomb, or bomb as I call them for short, because I didn't want to type out photobomb every time. If you're wondering why there's bombs in my database. And so in order to do that, you can actually set the default to auth.uid, and that'll grab the user ID from the request, from the session or cookie that gets passed up to Supabase. And it'll default to the currently authenticated user that's making that request. And then we also want to make this a foreign key. So we would select, in my case, I select the profiles table instead of the auth table. I pretty much only keep the auth table as related to like user authentication. I don't really do anything extra with it. And then the ID field is what we want to, and then you save that. And now you have a new likes table that you could build a whole like feature around this application. You could have a little heart here, and then click like and associate that with a particular post and user. That's pretty much just as far as editing the tables. It's really as easy as using a Google spreadsheet or Excel spreadsheet. You can sort, you can use different data types. So there's UID in here, there's text. It's really not super complicated. There's also the SQL editor. If you need to write more advanced custom queries, you can always just write raw SQL. Or if you just don't want to go through the editor, you know SQL really well, you can just create it through the SQL editor. And then as far as fetching that information, so on this homepage, for example, I'm using the Supabase client. You don't really have to know too much about it. I'm using Next.js, but as long as you have a basic understanding of JavaScript, I'm using the Supabase client, which comes from this server Supabase client helper, which if you follow one of those docs that I showed you about setting up Supabase for your particular framework, you'll get to the same point. And then with the Supabase client, all you have to do is say from post select, and then you enter what fields you want. So in this case, I want the image. I want the caption, which I'm showing the statue of David and Woody from Toy Story in my captions, as well as the username. And so I'm making a join on the profiles table. That's how you do it through the Supabase client, and fetching the username from that profiles table. And then I'm just passing the post down into this component. So as far as editing data and SQL, that's pretty much all there is to it. It's super simple in Supabase. I think the biggest thing to talk about next would be storage, especially with an application like this where it's very image heavy. So storage in Supabase is used to upload files and PDFs, images, any sort of files. And you might be asking, if you're newer to web dev, why not just stuff your files into a database? Because files can be super large. And when you store it in Supabase storage or S3 or any of these other solutions, you can actually serve it via a CDN and cache it and do all sorts of fancy performance optimizations for it that you might not necessarily be able to do with a database. And then with images, you also actually get image resizing if you're a part of their pro tier, and optimization. So if you're in Chrome, Supabase will detect that user agent, and it'll actually serve you WebP images instead of, it'll convert your images and serve them as WebP instead of JPEG or PNG. So like I said, it's similar to S3. It has the same concept of buckets, which I'll show you here in a second. So you upload your images into buckets that you create. Buckets you can just consider like kind of like a directory on your computer of files. And row level security policies actually work for buckets too. So you'll want to create policies that let people upload to your buckets and let them read from your buckets. So in this particular application, I have a bucket for posts as well as photobombs. And so just step back a little bit and give you an idea of what photobombs are. I thought it'd be a fun example to integrate replicate and their instruct wrong password pix to pix model, I think is what it's called, which takes a picture and then you can give it a prompt and it'll convert that picture or something. So for the statue of David, I've got some examples where I turned him into Shrek. I also made him a surfer. This one's really interesting to me because it like kept the guy's abs and then it put the surfer on top of him. And so you can add all kinds of things. You can say give him a mustache, and then you can say photobomb it and it'll spin while it's pulling. You can actually see in the network tab here. It creates the request to replicate and then it pulls it until the model's done generating the new image. I'm not sure what it uses. It's replicate, but it uses yeah, one sec. It's using strikes, pix to pix. I think I use this one because it has, I've noticed that on replicate. So replicate is a web application where people can upload machine learning models and then it generates, they create an API interface to the ML model. So you can interact with it, you can sign up, and actually it costs money, like depending on how much you use it. It's not a whole lot though, like I've done a bunch and I'm only being charged $1.18. So it's definitely worth it to mess around with. I don't know what it's doing under the hood. But yeah, I just found this one. I thought it was the most interesting. So instruct pix to pix. I'm using this one because the other one has less runs. You can see the number of runs. Even though these are the same model, because replicate does this annoying thing where if it hasn't been used a lot, it does like a cold start and it can take like 3 minutes to generate a model if not a lot of people are using it. So definitely look for one with a lot of runs, unless you don't care about the startup time. But I don't want to be up here for like 5 minutes talking to you guys while I was generating. Yeah, so you can see it gave him a mustache, and then when I send it, that gets uploaded. I take that image, I download it from replicate, and then I pass it up to my bucket in Supabase. It doesn't do anything because, like I said, it's a half-baked web application. But if you refresh the page, it also creates a record in my bombs table that I was showing you. And you can see now I've got the guy with the mustache. And so behind the scenes, what that's doing is it's taking that image, like I said, from replicate. Replicate sends back a URL, and then I fetch that image as a blob, upload it into the database. And Supabase, when you upload anything to storage, it'll actually give you the path back. And so if you know the bucket name and the path, you can actually call, and I have a little helper function in here. You can call supabase.storage.from, the name of the bucket, and then the path of the image, and it'll actually give you back the public URL to it, which you can throw on your website. So that's how storage works. Yeah, it's super fun to play around with the replicate API. Thought it make it a little bit more interesting than just uploading random images. So yeah, the next feature, which I don't have an example for, are the real-time features of Supabase. So similar to Firebase, you can create channels and hook into channels. If you've used WebSockets like Socket.io or any library like that, it's a very similar concept. So for instance, if I wanted this homepage to dynamically update anytime anybody uploaded an image, I could create a channel called upload or something like that. And then anytime I could select this, or I could edit this post table to enable real time. And then I could hook into those changes on that table and just automatically show new posts as people create them. So I think for that particular use case, I wouldn't bother because it's kind of like Twitter. Like imagine if you're using Twitter and every time someone posted a new tweet that you follow, you just constantly get bumped up to the top. So that's kind of why I didn't integrate it in this application that I was building. But it's really helpful if you have chat features that you want to build, or real-time collaborative editing of any sort. And then the last feature that I want to talk about that Supabase does that I also don't have an example for in this particular application is serverless functions. So the reason I think I definitely could have used a serverless function in this application, the reason I didn't is because Next.js actually lets you build API endpoints within it. It's like a full stack framework. So in order to make it call to replicate, I just created a separate a backend Node.js API endpoint. To actually upload to replicate and then pull replicate for the output. But if I was using a SPA, which I didn't have any sort of server, I was just building like a front end React application or Angular application. I could definitely utilize Supabase's edge functions. Which is almost like it's like writing your own API within Supabase. Serverless is something that's kind of new, and I'm probably not the best. You probably get a better answer from ChatGPT if you ask them how serverless works. But it basically like spins up these functions in these machines like as you need them. And they emphasize on these machines being very close to your users. So instead of having like 4 data centers across the entire US, like from West Coast to East Coast, you might have like 30 or 40 data centers that could be really close to your user. So the time to get a response back from those servers is a lot quicker. And so if I wasn't using Next.js, I think building those API, those replicate functions within Supabase would be a good idea. I didn't think about it until I had already used Next.js and built it. Otherwise, I probably would have done it as an example. And then Joe, right? You mentioned push notifications in Slack, which is another thing that I'm really glad you mentioned because I completely forgot. That's a huge use case of Firebase. Unfortunately, Supabase doesn't have push notifications built in. And so to get around that, they recommend using database webhooks, which is another application of serverless functions. So you can actually hook into changes in your database. So anytime, let's say you're building a social media app and you had friend requests, anytime you got a new friend request, you could detect that change in your database and then send someone a text message or email or push notification about that friend request. You just have to use some sort of, so you'd have to use Firebase for your push notifications service, or you'd have to use OneSignal is another one that they recommended that I linked out to. And then as far as alternatives go, there's one called Pocketbase, which is kind of popular. It's much more small scale. It's built in Golang. It's only self-hosted, so Supabase is completely, you can actually self-host Supabase because it's free and open source. You could rip it off GitHub and host it yourself if you wanted to. But there's also the pay as you grow model that I mentioned earlier. With Pocketbase, it's only self-hosted, so you'd have to figure out your own servers and setup for that. It's built on SQLite, and it's extensible and customizable. That you can write extensions in Go, but it's not as scalable as Supabase. Because I think the biggest reason for that is because it's built on SQLite, which is like a file. It's a database in a file. It's not a robust database like Postgres. And then the other alternative, the one I've been talking about this whole time, is Firebase. Reasons you might use Firebase is because the push notifications, like I mentioned. It's got an older and bigger community, and it's NoSQL. So if you really like NoSQL, if that's a draw for you, then I would use Firebase. And then BYOB, you could always, everybody knows what that stands for, build your own backend. Yeah. So do we have any questions about Supabase or the application that I build? And if you don't want to ask me here, you can always reach out to me at kyle@madkins@gmail.com, and then Kyle@madkins on everything, Twitter, GitHub, Instagram. So yeah.
About the packets, because I'm not super familiar, but I know a little bit.
Yeah.
The S2 packets are the Amazon one, right? So are those the Amazon packets?
Say that again, sorry.
The S3 packets from AWS? Or
I was just saying they're the same concept. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Supabase is actually built on top of AWS, so you're like actually using it S3 buckets. It's just a nicer interface for them. Yeah, you can create new buckets from Supabase. Yeah. So if I want to create a profiles bucket for people's profile images, and then you can mark it as a public bucket so that people can read from it. You can't actually upload to the bucket, even if it's public. That's just for read access. And then you can create it and you can start uploading to it.
Second question. So I use Firebase, and the problem that I always had is like, I had like, let's say I had 30 records that were rendered, and every time something updates, the whole 30 records were like re-rendered. And Firebase counts, like they give you certain amount of weeks for free.
Oh,
And those were like going very quick.
yeah.
Like
Just as a developer, like building it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there was a way that you can do like a developer mode, so you don't run on your own stuff, but how much more does Supabase give you compared to Firebase? Because Firebase can get very expensive very quickly.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm working off Subase's free tier. It's got pretty high limits, 50 megabyte file uploads. I think that's just for a single file. So as long as you're up, or maybe it might be multiple files. But as long as you're, you can do front end optimizations to make that smaller. 500 megabits of database, and oh, that might be bandwidth actually, because this is a gig of file storage. And then 500 megabytes of database storage. So I haven't hit those limits yet, but I don't know how long it would take you. Just as a developer working on it, I think it'd be really hard to hit those limits.
Like I know like Firebase was like 10,000 reads per day or something like that.
Yeah.
This is not like worldwide, application, but I don't know how fast. Like, obviously if it's like something that's super used, like that would be quick.
Yeah, like once you deploy this, I think you would hit it faster, but as a single developer, even a team of developers working, it seems like it's based more on like bandwidth versus and storage versus the reads. Yeah. So I haven't run into any problems. I don't even think I gave them my credit card. So yeah, I don't think they could charge me if they wanted to. They probably just you'd probably just notice your API like start returning errors and be like, sign up to give us your money. And then the pro tier is $25 a month per project, and then the additional usage. So with like AWS and GCP and other like cloud platforms, once you met all of those for that $25 a month, you would just start paying for your additional usage. So it starts out pretty cheap and then it kind of grows. They don't really have a whole lot of details on their pricing page about how fast and how much it grows though. So that'd be something to look into for sure. Oh, and then I just noticed this too. I guess with your free projects, you want to make sure that you're not taking a week off because they pause your project. You might just have some like cold start times, kind of like replicate. I don't think they would just shut down your project. But that's something in the fine print that I didn't notice. So, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have a tendency to put off your side projects, at least touch them once a week so you don't get paused.
It's a nice platform. It's got so much built in, so much nice on the ground.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things to me is that it's built on a SQL database. I think just as a user of it, I was learning more about SQL, like row level security policies and things like that are transferable skills to other platforms. Everybody uses SQL, whereas Firebase, I feel like it's very you're learning Firebase, and at the end of the day, you can't take that anywhere else except for Firebase. So I found that valuable. And then if you for some reason outgrow Supabase or you have a different use case, you could always export that data from SQL or from the Postgres database and take it to another SQL database on AWS or Google Cloud Platform, wherever you need to put your data.
How widespread is it used?
I think it's still relatively new. I feel like I just started hearing about it within the last year, maybe. So I would probably bet not super popular. Like Firebase is definitely has a bigger community, bigger history there. Their documentation is awesome though. If you go to the developers section, I think that's the biggest thing for me for any new tool, because I can't learn if I can't read about it. And it doesn't have good documentation. And I think they're definitely killing it in the documentation. They also have information about extensions, which is really cool for yeah, these are the ones I was looking at for Postgres. So there's you can install Postgres extensions just like you would in your own database. So you can run like cron jobs or it's very customizable, extensible.
I saw you kind of react, I'm sorry, next. Any other languages or how would you checking your code or
So I think the most popular way of using it is with JavaScript for sure, because I think it's geared toward like front end developers who want to do full stack, that don't want to set up their own database and servers and stuff like that. So the Supabase client, I think might actually be the only one, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like maintained and promoted by Supabase. They have a Python client as well, but I'm trying to figure out where that was in the docs. Yeah. Did you see that here? I'm missing it. Community. Oh, okay. I definitely saw it somewhere. I can't remember where, but they have a, like you said, they have community implemented clients. I'll just look it up. Yeah, so they have like a Python client for it. I think it says it's in beta. Yeah, public beta. If that tells you how new Supabase is, that even their Python client is in beta. I feel like Python's like the first one. So, yeah, I think most people are using it within JavaScript, within a JavaScript framework, like Next.js or Vue or Angular. And yeah, and that was the one I was giving examples of there. Yeah. Yeah, I've got I forgot what theme this is. I got my theme, my font. I think I use the font I use is called Dank Mono for anybody who's interested. Yes, I paid for a coding font, not ashamed.
It is very good.
$24 worth it. Or 24 pounds. Yeah. I actually have a repo for this if anybody wants to take a look at the code, not the Paramount code. I think it might be private. Oh wow, but like, okay, so yeah, so if you want to go look at the code, just go to github.com/kylemadkin/photobomb, and you can see how I use the Supabase client. Just follow these instructions. I'm not doing anything other than just a plain old Next.js server. Actually, you will want to create a replicate account. I'm not going to show it because I don't want to accidentally show my API key, because that would be something that I would do. But you need to sign up and get your API key, and then I can create a sample .env file right after this talk. So you know what credentials you need to, if you want to run the whole application yourself. And then I guess you'd have to set up the tables and stuff in Supabase, but that should be easy to figure out just from the code, because every select statement tells you what table you're selecting it, what information you're selecting from it. So it'd be a good opportunity to learn the Supabase admin UI.
Your concept of database migrations.
I think that would probably be handled by I think like an npm package, if you're working with JavaScript. I'm trying to think of one that I've used before that does migrations. That's a good point though.
I feel like a common trade-off with like, it's so nice, so good that we feel like we can use manual abilities.
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing with Supabase, it's definitely targeted more toward like independent developers and makers than like, organizations that have to work in a team of people and touch the same database. So yeah, that's definitely a weakness. Yeah, it looks like there's guides for like migrating projects, but not creating migrations for your database. The best, the best guess I could give you is just the number of like stars and forks on GitHub. So it has 45.4K stars and 3K forks. So I'd say like semi-popular. Like I said, I just learned about it within the last year or so, so it's definitely still new. But I think people really like it as an alternative to Firebase.
Looks like if we want to in a few platform updates, are you wanting to, excuse me, having to update if you're hosting everything with them, or do you have the option of staying with the legacy version?
Yeah, that is something I'm not sure about. Yeah, that's a good question to keep in mind. Yeah, the answer is I have no idea. I'll try to maintain this project for long enough that I run into that, and then I'll get back to you. But yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. I have a feeling like the way they would roll it out, like at the end of the day, your data is just a Postgres database, and the platform updates are probably a lot of extra features or like a UI layer built on top of it. So you probably get all those UI changes, but a lot of the technology underneath, you probably wouldn't notice the difference. But
does it support like MongoDB, or does you have to use Postgres?
yeah, it's all Postgres and SQL. If you wanted something like NoSQL, I would definitely use Firebase instead. There might even be like a Mongo.
I know that they have no SQL, but I'd rather use like MongoDB, or I have to probably write my own API to get compatible with that.
Yeah, no, I think like Postgres is the bedrock of Supabase. So if you don't have Postgres, then you don't have Supabase, other than their features that are added onto it, like storage and serverless and stuff like that, that don't revolve around Postgres. But as far as data and store and tables, and it's all built on SQL and Postgres. Any other questions? Any prompts? Any images you want me to download and put into? I haven't done a whole lot with Woody yet. I think I gave him a mustache. Yeah. Oh, that's a good, yeah, that's a good one. They do support full text search within Supabase. I don't know the limits. I remember there was a weird caveat of the JavaScript client for a full text search, like it didn't support something that I felt like it definitely should support. I'm about to look it up so I remember what it was. So you like, for example, you can see these examples have like a SQL and then a JavaScript example and Dart. They also have a Dart client if you're into Flutter and Dart. I've never used it, but so all these have a JavaScript example, except for searching multiple columns. Yeah, that was the thing I thought was weird. So if you're using the JavaScript client, you won't be able to do a full text search on multiple columns. You'll have to probably create some sort of function in Supabase, which you can create your own functions here, like a SQL function. So you can see I already have one for handling the new user when I was talking about how every time a user gets created when they join, it has that trigger that it runs this handle new user function that inserts it in the profiles table. So you might have to create some sort of database function or serverless function, because you wouldn't be able to use just the JavaScript client on the front end. And I'm not really sure what the reason for that is. But yeah, these are the docs if you want to learn more about full text search. That was something that I did look into because that's a really popular. Oh, really? The syntax isn't great. I think it's like very, I guess, the JavaScript client's nice, but yeah, I guess it's just Postgres SQL. So. Sorry, I just blew through the whole presentation in like 15 minutes, but I have a tendency to talk fast, so. Yeah,
We're doing a little early actually, so we can stay here for like about 15-20 minutes to hang out for that one that are here for the first time. If you don't know, we usually go and hang out to the little courtyard in downtown, behind the downtown house pizza. So I hope you can join us there. We'll try to leave. Like 5 to 8. We'll be heading there, but for now, there's some beer, there's some soda, so it's feel free to hang out. Thank you, Kyle.
yeah. You want me to
Good.
cut these good people off? All right, bye, everybody.
Very nice piece of software.
Thank you, everyone. We're just gonna hang out here. We'll see you next time. Bye.